Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Webster. I'm the founder, CEO, and CISO for Cyvergence. And today we're going to talk about something that is very important to me. We're going to talk about executive organizational navigation, also known as EON. So it's a lot of this around the behavioral sciences behind executive readiness. And so this you're going to see bleeds into it. This is my categorization of that. But I'm very excited to be putting this out there so other people will be aware. So what is EON? Yes, it's the executive leadership discipline, but what does that actually mean? It's there to help people understand how organizations actually operate. It helps with navigating executives, boards, politics, and culture, improving decision making and influence within organizations, communicating risk in business terms, and leading effectively through complexity. I mean, the reality is it helps leaders navigate their organization, not just function within the organization. And that is a huge difference compared to a lot of the disciplines that are out there. So here are the disciplines that it's built on. Awareness. And awareness is much deeper. We're going to dive into these in more detail, but it's recognizing the forces that are shaping the decisions across the organizations. How aware are you? Judgment, deciding wisely under pressure. And influence. How do you gain commitment and alignment? Then ultimately, navigation, navigating complexity to achieve outcomes that are important to you within the organization. So the reality is when we were looking at executive readiness, we've been preparing the long way. When you look at this, especially related to cybersecurity, you see here there's a lot of cybersecurity acronyms. You have compliance, governance, third-party risk, all of these types of things. But executive readiness is where we're coming in and connecting and integrating. So better decisions are being made by the organizations, and ultimately there is better outcomes. That's what this is all about. That's why we have EON. And a lot of this is just taking all of these different nuances and tricks and trades and things like that and putting it together. So awareness draws from multiple disciplines, and you got psychology, business, governance, what the power dynamics look like and so on. All of this is part of that big picture. It is part of awareness. It's not any one thing, because if you don't understand something, let's say you don't understand psychology, then you don't understand how people operate. You may not understand how people operate within a particular organization or how that power influences people. So all of these things are part of the discipline of EON. Next, we have judgment. These are about the decision sciences. A lot of people think it's just the critical thinking, the risk analysis, the ethics, behavioral sciences, and things like that. But the reality is, a lot of this is based upon awareness, because all of these different disciplines that I'm talking about are based on awareness. If you aren't aware of other people, you aren't aware of the forces that are driving them, it's going to be more difficult for you to have solid judgment about the organization. It's very, very critical. And influence. And you get to influence. That is the third capability that we're talking about. It's about the ability to impact. It isn't about authority. A lot of people think it's authority. Yes, the authority is going to have some influence. I don't want to downplay that. But a lot of it is about communication. How does your organization communicate? How do you talk about things? How do they talk about things? Are you using their language? Then, of course, it's going to be emotional intelligence, leadership, all of those sorts of things are tying into this. So these are integral to understand the organization, and all of these are based on awareness and judgment and trying to build all this stuff in. So if you don't have a good foundation in awareness, that's going to create a lot of ripple effects for everything that you're trying to do across the organization. Finally, we've got navigation. This is where you get into strong organizational behavior, adaptive leadership, you're becoming political savvy and all those types of things. That's part of what it means to navigate an organization. And to me, this is the pinnacle of where you can go from a leadership perspective. You've got these four major drivers that are going to be true no matter where you are, but they all are going to relate to one another. So if your navigation is very strong, you can't make up for no awareness, but it can help to influence those things, but it's never going to be 100%. So having a layer from a leadership perspective is very, very important. As I said here, navigation is the culmination of awareness, influence, and judgment. So, executive readiness and practice. And a lot of times people think about these skills as a collection of independent skills. Hey, I've got strong negotiation skills. You might, but the reality is strong negotiation skills also bleed over into other skills as well. And that's why this is so important. Having all of these types of skills is part of what it means to be a strong leader, and it's going to help you with your navigation within organizations. You know, it's a continuous integration, as I say here, of all of these capabilities. It helps you to achieve outcomes in complex organizations, knowing how to handle specific types of people. If you master Eon, you are mastering executive readiness. And the reality is, all of us are on a journey. There are people that are watching this and may be ahead of me. There are a lot of people who are below me too. But all of this stuff is important for your ability to be a strong executive. So when you talk about executive, and there's the next generation CISO course, that what it means to be a successful CISO. We are a cybersecurity company. As you saw in the beginning, we're bridging business and cybersecurity, and we do some leadership training. The next generation CISO is part of that, but this is what it's going to take. You know, when you talk about business acumen, that is a foundational skill to being a successful CISO in many organizations. It does take into account everything. It applies directly to the CISO role when you're talking about that course. But why cybersecurity? You know, to me, cybersecurity should operate across the entire organization. In many cases, it does not. Take a typical compliance model like SOC 2. You still have HR requirements that go into it. You still have some financial. You have to build some enterprise risk management practices into a SOC 2 audit. It's important. They might be very limited. You're not going to tell HR what to do or how to do certain things, but you might make sure that certain things are done as a matter of practice, having an offboarding checklist. If we go back to SOC 2, for example, you know, it depends on IT operations, finance, legal, HR, and leadership. Many cybersecurity challenges are actually organizational challenges, and that's big. And the same leadership, decision-making, behavior, and governance principles do apply well beyond cybersecurity. I want to make that clear. Everything we're talking about, this isn't executive organizational navigation. It isn't the cybersecurity executive organizational navigation. These are executive organizational navigation tools that are useful to absolutely everybody. That tends to be where I focus. I come from a cybersecurity background. I've been in cybersecurity for many years. It's where I've been a leader, both as a CISO and non-CISO. I have been in sales and other things, and I apply all of these different disciplines into the process of what we're focusing on. But cybersecurity is also in a very unique situation. And there are lots of exceptions to this, and some of you might be thinking about them, but more often than not, CISOs have to influence. They're not doing the work themselves, they're influencing other parts of the organization to get whatever it is they need to get done. And that means sometimes pushing for things that are going to be very difficult to do or people don't want to do because whatever they're paid on, or there's a lot of other consideration to take into account, it becomes a challenge. So I think cybersecurity is in a very unique situation compared to others. You know, take finance. The CFO, they have their rules and their capabilities, and here's how we're going to get things done. Cybersecurity, hey, can you please go get this done? Can you please install that firewall? Hey, can we check the access control list on that firewall? All of those types of things. So it is in a unique situation. But Eon focuses on cybersecurity because the consequences, and they're going up. Everybody is aware of it. We've seen the new AI reports and all Project Glasswing and so on. They're changing the risk landscape very quickly. But the consequences do make those dynamics highly visible within an organization. Cybersecurity is the laboratory, but the principles are all executives. This is just going back to saying the same thing that I said before. I'm applying the principles within cybersecurity and within business, but if I give executive advisory that are beyond cybersecurity, it's still Eon. And a lot of those, like I'd say 80 to 90% of the lessons that I talk about, they're going to be applicable across the board. They're just going to be applied and there's slightly different pressures when you're walking into, say, the CTO role, the COO role, and so on. All right, the Divergence application of Eon. We have a lot of different things that we do with it. So I already briefly spoke about the next generation CISO. Absolutely, that's built into it. I've got something called the Divergent Cybersecurity Leadership Exchange. That's pretty powerful. It's a once a month training that we've got, so that's yet another way of learning. There's the executive leadership. This is where we've got coaching, executive advisory, things like that, and embedded leadership. This is a virtual CISO, virtual chief risk officer, and so on. Risk and decision alignment workshop. And to me, this is big. This goes back to communication and awareness. If you have never done something like this in the past, it is so enlightening. A lot of the terminology we use in cybersecurity, we'll talk about, hey, we've got 5,000 level 10 CVEs. What? That's going to scare some people that you're working with, and they may not understand what that impact is. So we don't communicate well with the business in cyber. We've got our own little silo, and it's different than the silo that the CFO uses. And a lot of this, yes, I'm using some principles of risk management and talking about risk quantification and how do you get the alignment across the board, but how are you creating alignment up at that business level? To me, that is absolutely critical, very, very critical. Finally, we have a new course that's coming out. The first one is going to be September 2026, September 17th specifically, and it's developing your authentic leadership presence. You know, there's a lot that's going on. So yes, Eon is highly used within Cyvergence. So I want to thank you very much for listening. Feel free to ask questions, reach out to me. If you have anything, there's my email address here, matthew.webster@cyvergence.biz, and feel free to visit the website. I've got a lot of opinions, all these documents you can go through and read. If you're curious about any subject, definitely take a look at it there. But I want to thank everybody for listening. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to hear from some of you soon. Thank you so much.